Okay. Recording started. All right, we're off and running. Everybody has a copy of Volker's resume, or a very brief one there, because it could actually go on for many pages. I want to first of all thank Volker Franke for traveling from Kennesaw State. He's doing a tremendous seminar for us, a 3-day seminar that we're working across the street with some PKSOI interns, as well as CSL, as well as PKSOI instructors, and I'm sure we're going to do it again. So we're going to welcome other folks probably sometime in August and September. But Volker, among other things, is founder and chairman of Trends Global, which is a nonprofit organization, and I won't go into any great depth there because I don't want to steal too much time from Volker. He's a professor of conflict management at Kennesaw State University, the founding director of the PhD program in international conflict management at KSU, worked at the Bonn International Center for Conversion, Maxwell School, of course got every degree you need to include a PhD from Syracuse's Maxwell School, and author of 40 journal articles, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to leave it at that. And if we could just very quickly, we've accounted for the people that are online, or I should say on the phone, but if we could just real quick go around the room, nothing more than first name and position here at PKSOI and elsewhere, and so to identify to everybody who's in the room. So go ahead, Katrina.
Hi, okay, Katrina. I'm with the Lessons Learned Division here.
Scott Braden, the researcher at PKSOI.
I'm Brendan. I'm in the stability center.
Carter Oates, I'm the senior advisor for security and police instability operations.
Sherwood McGinnis. I'm an adjunct professor over at Dickinson, plus I do some contract work here at the War College.
Excellent. All right, Volker. I'll confirm it. All yours.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for all of you for coming. Thanks for calling in. Eric, it takes a webinar to actually talk to you.
We're going to talk soon. Ann and I are looking forward to it. I apologize. I was in Jordan.
That's perfectly all right. So, as Rick explained, I've been here for a couple of days running a workshop on case writing and case teaching. And I wanted to provide you with some of the information that I provided to the session participants. You all have access, and Rick has worked tirelessly to make that possible, to the PowerPoint presentation. And the PowerPoint that we're going through today is a shortened version of the PowerPoint I use in the seminar. In the seminar, this extends all day, but it's interrupted by actually cases that we're using, sample cases that we're using, so I can show some of the methodology. So we'll have to cut that part short, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what cases are and why we're using them. So now I need to make sure that this works. It does work. So case studies, the way we're using case studies is based on the Harvard Business School model of case studies. So many folks use case studies in regular parlance, talking about historical cases. So you read the 300-page book on what happened in Rwanda or at the Battle of Gettysburg. Those are cases, but we're talking about cases that are shorter, that are used for classroom purposes and to generate interactive learning experiences through case discussion, through role play, through simulations, and I'll talk about all of those. So the case studies, the way we're developing them, are based on the Harvard Business School model. In the 1920s, the Harvard Business School was founded, and as any good academic institution, you want to have textbooks for your students. Well, no textbooks existed on business practices, so professors went around and had their students go around and talk to business professionals about their experiences and what they did. And they wrote up those experiences in case studies and had their students evaluate those case studies. Basically, instead of providing the students with best practices and lessons and recommendations, as we typically do in academic articles, and those articles that we use in the classroom, we have the students derive at these recommendations and best practices through classroom discussion, and then we have them discuss courses of action, look at what happened in the case, why did happen, what happened, and what could be done differently. So that's what case studies are supposed to do. So they're a terrific classroom tool to engage students. they're also a terrific training tool to actually simulate reality as much as we can in the classroom setting. So that's part of the reason why we use case studies. We want to prepare our students, and whether this is in an undergraduate academic environment or in a military professional training environment, we want to prepare our students to go out and face reality and face the complexities that are out there. So what we're trying to do with case studies is, and I use case studies widely to also include simulation and role play exercises, what we want them to do is we want to simulate reality as much as we can in the classroom so they can go out and take the lessons that they learn in the classroom and apply them. When they're encountering complex, unknown situations, they have had some exposure to how to respond to them, and it's not all new. So particularly for strategic leadership, case studies are very, very useful because you're also looking at case dilemmas, and these case dilemmas you look at specifically in a story, but you look at the case dilemmas also in terms of larger policy implications, and that gets you to the strategic level. When we make decisions, all of us, we make decisions based on what some have termed the rational actor model. We're making decisions based on costs and benefits. For any alternative that we're looking at, we're calculating costs and we're calculating the benefits, and we choose the option that either maximizes costs or minimizes benefits. Herbert Simon called this, because we cannot look at all possible alternatives for any decision, Herbert Simon told us that what we're doing is actually satisficing. For any decision that we make, we have a threshold. And the first alternative that meets that threshold, that's the decision we adopt. When we buy a car, we look at fuel economy, we look at space, we look at maybe do we like to drive it, how fast can it go, and so on to make that. And the first car that meets those criteria, price. First car that meets those criteria, maybe the car that we purchase. When we make decisions, we also rely on heuristics. So when all of you are sitting here in a seminar room, you come in, you sit at the table, you wait for me to start talking. Why are you doing this? You're doing this because you have experienced seminar discussions before, and you know what to do. You're relying, unconsciously, you're relying on a heuristic. We're all trying to make sense of reality every single moment, every turn that we take. And we do that based on past experiences. We're also looking at heuristics could also be availability. So something that is reminding us of another experiences we've had, we're using that. So it's either something that's in the back of our mind, most recent, or something that reminds us of another scenario experience that we have been in. So when we train for decision making, then it helps us to focus on skills that allow those who are going through the training to recall heuristics that we want them to recall quickly in a scenario, particularly in an environment that is new. So we want to equip them with heuristics that they can pull from to make the right decision, whatever that is. So case studies, simulation exercises, role play helps forming those heuristics, and then hopefully in the field being able to make those decisions. What is a case? What is in a case? Cases start with stories. A good case tells a good story. And we'll look at some of those. Cases typically recount real or realistically simulated events, problems or decision dilemmas, so that the students or the readers can wrestle with the complexities and ambiguities and uncertainties that are confronted by the decision makers portrayed in the case. So students, readers, are placed at the center of that decision, and in doing so, we're illustrating to them how theory, concepts, can be used to address real-world policy problems. I'm going to talk more about that. Cases, teaching cases, are very different from academic articles. when all of us who are writing academic papers, when we write an academic paper, we present an argument. I tell my students, the first thing I want to see in the first paragraph is a thesis statement. And then I want you to develop that thesis. And then I want you to build an argument around it. And then I want you to come up with recommendations for whatever your thesis is, whatever the problem is, could be improved. That would make a lousy case, because I'm basically telling readers what I want them to think. I want to convince them of a particular opinion that I have. In a case study, I want the readers, the students, to derive at their own lessons, to wrestle with the decisions and the various points of view that went into that decision. So what I find is, think of a case more like a newspaper article. In a newspaper article, the author tells you what his or her opinion is, you're reading an editorial or a commentary. In a good newspaper article, you would get all the sides and with no authorship. The author doesn't present what he or she thinks. The author simply presents the different sides that are relevant to the issue that he is or she is describing in the piece. Think about that as the type of writing that goes into case studies, as opposed to the standard academic writing that most of us do every day. Cases compel students to distinguish pertinent from peripheral information. They help them identify problems and dilemmas, decision parameters and alternative courses of action, determine possible solutions, formulate strategies, and recognize and confront obstacles to their implementation. So it's really an exercise in critical thinking. Assigning an academic article to a class, the best you can get is asking students, do they agree with the author's argument or not, and why? Here, there's not an argument to be presented. There's simply facts in a nice story that draws the readers in, that lets them actually think through some of the decisions portrayed in the case, and then also some of the potential alternative solutions. We distinguish between three types of cases. There can be historical or retrospective, they can be fictional, or they can be decision forcing. And in the seminar, I have now examples for all of those cases that we're going through. These are only broad categories, and there are a number of cases that actually cover all three simultaneously. So you can have a historical decision forcing case, where we ask you to suspend what you know, the Monday morning quarterbacking. Okay? Suspend what you know, suspend the last 30 years, and put yourself in the situation of a decision maker in 1982. Given the information that that decision maker had at the time, what decision would you arrive at? So that becomes then, and then you can fictionalize it a little bit, and now you have all three categories covered by one case. Retrospective cases typically present a comprehensive account of a problem in history and specify the actors involved, the cycle of events, and the real outcome. And we see these are maybe the most traditionally used cases. Any book that you read that's written by a historian will present a retrospective case. The cases that we're using here may be based on that, but we want to tease out dilemmas. One of the problems that you have for readers, for students in training, if you read your 200 or 300 book historical account, it's more difficult to come up with the dilemmas and to really find what is important, because there's so much that you're reading around it, that a teaching case may condense 1 or 2 dilemmas onto 20 pages and still provide you with the alternative viewpoints, but the dilemmas jump out at readers much more quickly. Students then analyze those decisions, why they were taken, and what the results were. What would have been alternative options, and how might they have led to different outcomes, and what would these different outcomes be? In decision-forcing cases, typically those decision-forcing cases happen in the classroom. Historical cases are usually read ahead and then discussed. Decision-forcing cases can either be a movie or a clip of a movie, or they can be a printout, or they can be a newspaper article, or a commentary, or a picture that you bring to class, you put it in front of the students, and they will respond to it. Decision forcing cases don't have an outcome initially. You're basically telling a story, and then you stop at the decision point. And now you turn it around to your audience and say, what would you do in this situation? And you go through that conversation, and you have several people squirm in their seats and tell you what and how they decide. And then at some point, you close it and you tell the students what really happened. But it makes them feel a little bit the difficulty in making that decision, which is much more compelling than reading about a difficult decision. Okay? We're simulating having to make that kind of a decision. So in the epilogue, we tell the rest of the story because we don't want students left hanging. But we then ask them to analyze why happened what happened. So I'll use a case study, for instance, I mentioned this earlier, where we're looking at it's a historical fictional decision forcing case. Okay? We're in July of 1965, and we're simulating the escalation of the war in Vietnam. And on this day in July 1965, the president calls a meeting of his chief advisors. That meeting never happened. And the advisors, the conversation around the table is based on 12 memos written at the time between early June and mid-July of 1965. And we're asking participants to suspend what they know. Suspend 50 years of knowledge and see what the decision would be in this fictional meeting on what we're doing in Vietnam. And it doesn't matter whether I've run it with undergraduate students or colonels. The decision is always escalate. And then you can discuss why does this happen. It's very easy to say that was the wrong decision, but when we're looking at the decision with the information available at the time, or at least a snapshot of the information, it puts that historical event that we retrospectively interpret into a different light, because we're beginning to sympathize a little bit with the decision makers and the information that they had available and the constraints that they were operating under when making those decisions. Fictional cases usually revolve around events or decision dilemmas that approximate real-world policy problems. When do you fictionalize a case? I would say fictionalize a case when absolutely necessary. There are so many bad, good decisions out there that you can draw from that you can use that make teaching a lot easier. Because here's what's happening. You're writing your case, and you need to provide some background to the case. 20 pages can't capture the decision to escalate the war in Vietnam, for instance, or Operation Iraqi Freedom. But we have the internet. And everybody who reads the case can go and find all background information they need. Now imagine you write a fictional story. Now you have to write all this fictional background, okay, that they can't access. So do this only when absolutely necessary. There are reasons to fictionalize. A good colleague of mine, Karen Gutierrez, wrote a case that I'm using in this workshop on the situation after the Dayton Accords in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and she's looking at a Serb town where Serbs were displaced by Croats during the war. Now Dayton Accords, war's over, Serbs are returning. Croats are still sitting in their homes. And there is a riot, and S4 has to step in to quell that riot. That's the story. Now, the story takes place in the town of Monterich. The town of Monterich doesn't exist. In this case, it makes sense to fictionalize because you don't want to draw attention to very specific atrocities in a specific town. Yet, the town of Monterrey is an example of could be any town in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so, fictionalizing part of it is perfectly appropriate to protect sources or to protect what really happened. But you can go on the internet and you can find towns like Monterrey and you know what's going on in that war. In general now, regardless of whether we're talking about a historical, a decision forcing, or a fictional case, all cases highlight dilemmas at two levels. Each story that draws you in will show a dilemma. That's the case dilemma, and that can be discussed. But the case dilemma then illustrates larger policy dilemmas. And those larger policy dilemmas are going to be the key for the case. The case, the story, becomes the vehicle to transport those policy dilemmas. Cases, unlike academic articles, do not provide you with an argument. They don't provide you with a logical conclusion. They leave it open. They present evidence in support of both sides or all sides that are relevant to the case, and they often leave readers with discomfort because they don't provide an answer. But that's what you want. When I teach, the best classes are classes where my students are uncomfortable because they're thinking and they're engaged and they're hungry for an answer and they want to discuss. Now I have actually a classroom environment where they're learning and they're open to new ideas. So being uncomfortable is not a bad thing. All cases, all teaching cases, come with teaching notes. Teaching notes present the pedagogical roadmap, if you will, for how to teach the case. So all of us sitting around this table and being on the phone called in or logged in, who are teaching, we're using little vignettes, we're using little exercises in our classroom. And we know how to use the exercise, but nobody else does. What we want to do with these cases is we want to write them in such a way that anybody can pull them off the shelf and teach them. So that's the instruction for the instructor with ideas for how to teach the case. And for how to teach the case to different audiences, different classes, students versus professionals, larger classes, smaller classes, and cases should be adaptable to different environments. And then as the writer, it is part of your job to tell instructors how to adapt the case to different kinds of audiences and different purposes, teaching purposes. If a case works well, as an instructor you don't have much to do. You're not lecturing, you're facilitating because the students will discuss. We did this yesterday, I'm teaching a case and we start out by, I placed the participants in different roles, didn't say much else, and then showed a video. And I asked them to watch the video and then respond to the video in role. Stop the video, it was a 7-8 minute video, stopped the video, turned to the first person and said, how would you respond? And I didn't say anything for 10 minutes because the discussion was going. I simply pointed out who is next in terms of speaking, and then the conversation took its own dynamic and I didn't have to do much. And a lot of the dilemmas that I wanted to talk about came out in the discussion already, and all I had to do at the end was tie it all together. Okay? So that's what good cases do. Discussion replaces lecture, and we all know that students learn better and more and retain more when they're involved and engaged as opposed to when they're just listening to someone talking. And I say that as I'm sitting here just talking. So a case doesn't have the solution, unlike an academic article. A case doesn't provide recommendations, but it provides everything you need to know in the classroom for your students to develop these recommendations. When we discuss a case, and we'll talk about what cases are in a second, here are some general questions that I always ask every single time I ask of my students. What is the case about? What's the story? Tell me the story. So we're starting with the basics. What is the chronology of events? What happens in this story? What is or are the problems? And what are the dilemmas? And a dilemma is a situation, a decision situation, where there is no good answer, there is no good decision. And what really is very helpful is I teach this workshop on how to write cases to a number of PhD students in my own university, but also at other universities. And what happens is what they're learning by writing cases is immensely important for their dissertations, because what they're learning first is how to identify dilemmas. Because every good research is based on a dilemma. So it really helps. And when my students get stuck, and the ones that have taken this class and know about writing cases, when they get stuck in their dissertation, they don't know what they're doing anymore, I say, well, suspend everything that you know and everything that you've researched and that literature review, and tell me the story. Tell me a story. And when they have taken the class, they know exactly what that means, and they tell me a story, and that sometimes helps us get them to the next step and realize, oh, this is what my dissertation is about. Then I ask, what are the larger policy implications of these dilemmas that are in the story? Who are the main actors? And those could be individuals, those could be organizations, those could be countries. Who are protagonists and antagonists? What are their respective positions, interests, desired outcomes, messages, and measures? And if you take that, we've done it yesterday, out of that last bullet point, that last question, we developed an actors map. Who are the main actors in the case? What are their interests, desired outcomes, messages, and measures? And if you put that into a matrix, you have the entire event mapped. Now, if you want to develop policy recommendations, you can easily see in a snapshot what the effects are on the different actors and their interests. And given their interests, would they really want to go along, or would they oppose what you're recommending? Okay? So it provides a visual. Here's a story. This is a story of a case that we looked at in the workshop. I will read the story to you. September 16, 2007, approximately 12 or 8 p.m. in Nisar Square, Baghdad City. The white Kia sedan had finally come to a complete stop, its chassis riddled with bullet holes. Its occupants, an Iraqi medical student and his physician mother, had both been killed in a barrage of gunfire. The chaos had begun just 15 minutes before, with the nearby detonation of a bomb, while a heavily armed convoy was rushing American VIPs through the crowded streets of the Iraqi capital. When the shooting stopped, 17 Iraqis were dead and many more wounded. Were these just more unfortunate casualties of the Iraq War? Was this business as usual in the hot zone of a complex and dangerous occupation, or did something go really wrong here? That's the story. That's the starting point for this case. That story captures the main dilemmas. Okay? You read further on, what complicates the scenario further is the fact that the shooters were employees of Blackwater Worldwide. So now we got it, right? Somebody got shot, civilians got shot, they got shot by private security contractors. What's going on here? Why are there private security contractors shooting at civilians, right? It's a story. And I have to tell you, most of my academic articles start with a story because it draws readers in. There's nothing better if you have insomnia than to pick an academic article at 11:30 at night while you're laying in bed. Okay? If you make it past page 2, you really are in trouble. Okay? If you have a story, it illustrates what the next 15 pages or 20 pages are about, and it draws readers in. That's the start of a case. This is an academic article that I wrote, The Peacebuilding Dilemma on Civil-Military Cooperation and Stability Operations. This is really difficult to read, so maybe I can, Rick, I don't want everybody to just listen to me all the time. Could you read that paragraph for us?
Starting at 8:30 a.m.?
Yep.
At 8:30 a.m. local time on October 27, 2003, an ambulance packed with explosives rammed into security barriers outside the Red Cross headquarters in Baghdad, killing some 40 people, including 2 Iraqi International Committee of the Red Cross employees, and leaving more than 200 wounded. The ICRC announced immediately following the attacks withdrawal of its international staff from Baghdad, thereby reducing vital programs and services to the most vulnerable segments of the population. The October suicide bombing came 2 months after the August 19th attack on the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad that left 23 people dead, including Sergio Vieira de Mello, the Secretary General Special Representative in Iraq. Expressing horror and consternation, United Nations Development Program head Mark Malek Brown surmised on the day of the August attack, in quotes, "We do this humanitarian relief out of vocation. We are apolitical. We were here to help the people of Iraq and help them return to self-government. Why us?" End quotes.
So, story, right? You know what the article is about? You get a pretty good idea. It draws you in. It shows you the dilemmas. I can use this story to write an academic article as well. But I have your attention differently than presenting an argument immediately. Okay? So my thesis follows in the next paragraph or two, but as an opening for an article, I've always found this very compelling to draw you into what I'm writing about. And that works for cases as well. So I could develop a case study around this. Okay? So the first thing that we typically do after I am done talking, and we're moving into really workshop mode, is that I have participants think about a story. They should have a topic already, an idea of what they want to write about, and then I have them go and find a story that illustrates what you think you want to write. And then it's very easy to unfold 20 pages just based on that one paragraph, because you have the dilemma here. You have people who want to come to help and they're shot at and bombed. Why? Okay? That grabs you, I mean, as much as an academic article can. So, a story. This is a story, right? This is a picture. You can show in your classroom a picture. You can develop an entire case around a story, picture. What you're then doing is, in your teaching notes, you describe in more detail how to use this particular picture. So what we see here is a picture taken in the Ukraine. Okay, these are damaged goods in a kitchen in Donetsk. And of course you don't show the caption, you show simply the picture, and you have then people interpret, what does that mean to you? You have, these are pictures, again, you look for publicly available pictures, they capture something. And if you look at that left picture with the woman in shackles without the capture, imagine the diversity of responses you would be getting, right? But you get your students interested. Okay? It's a visual, it engages them. So a picture can be a case. Cases can also be, and some of you've used some of these, I'm sure, can be movies. We showed a clip of The Beast yesterday. The Battle of Algiers is something I use frequently in my courses. I have a case that I'm using, a decision forcing case that I'm using in a lot of the workshops. It's based on Ismail Bea's book, A Long Way Gone, which is memories of a child soldier in Sierra Leone. And the case I'm using is a 3-part case, 2 very short decision forcing pieces, and then the 3rd part is basically an exercise that asks participants to develop a reintegration plan for ex-combatants. Okay. Novels. Some of you may be familiar with the Belfort Adano, which I think is one of the best books on peace building available. have students read that novel, but ask the same case questions. What's the story? Who are the main actors? What are their interests? What are their desired outcomes? What's going wrong? But it allows students to personalize the issues that are important in peace building. Now, how do you write your case? You have an idea? And I said already, it's important that we're going to look for a story that can transport your case. So the first thing that you might want to do is map out your case. So here's a board plan, something similar to what might help you develop your case. Okay? So you come in, you have a topic, you know that you want to write on drug trafficking, or you want to write on civil-military relations in peace operations, or you want to write on the riots in Ukraine, or you want to write on Brexit, whatever it is. That's your issue. Describe your issue, and what about that issue is interesting to you? What stories or story could you use as an intro for this case? What are the implications of that story? So that gets to the larger policy dilemmas. Who are the actors? There are protagonists and antagonists. They have positions. Most of the time, if you're writing a story, you're presenting positions over time. Did those positions change? Why did they change? All of this needs to be described. We need to look at the case dilemmas. Those should be right away available when you look at your first paragraph, your opening paragraph. What are the larger policy implications? What are the dilemmas? What are the steps to solve them? And your protagonists will take steps, and you want to describe what those steps are and what the counter steps are. But present it in such a way that the protagonist presents his or her side and the antagonist the same way. It's not you describing what they did. Let them describe what they did or what their positions were. So in an academic paper,